The sun had barely begun its climb over the horizon, casting a pale golden light across the sprawling plains, when the first stirrings of trouble reached Jonah's quiet cabin. The air was still, the kind of stillness that carried the scent of wild grass, damp earth, and the faint tang of the river that snaked through the valley. Birds chirped lazily, indifferent to the human world below, while the distant mountains stood like silent sentinels bathed in early light. Jonah, a rugged man in his late 30s with calloused hands and a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun, moved slowly as he fed the cattle. Each movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic, a rhythm born from years of solitude and labor. He had always been a man of routine, preferring the company of animals to people, yet that very morning the air felt heavier, charged with an anticipation he could not name. The disturbance began as a faint murmur, the distant clatter of hooves and angry voices carried on the wind. Jonah paused mid-sweep, the broom in his hands resting against the wooden railing. His brow furrowed as he listened, the hum of the morning suddenly replaced by something sharper, something hostile. From the ridge, the first silhouettes of townsfolk appeared, striding toward his property in a wave of indignation and anger. At first he thought it might be a simple dispute, perhaps a misunderstanding over livestock or property boundaries. But as they drew closer, the expressions on their faces, wrinkled with disdain, twisted with contempt, made his stomach tighten. "Jonah," a voice shouted, breaking the quiet of the morning like a whip. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" The speaker was Mr. Clive, a stout man with a ruddy complexion and the sort of arrogance that only comes from wealth and influence. He gestured wildly at Jonah, his finger jabbing in accusation. "Do you have any idea how foolish you've made yourself look?" Jonah's jaw tightened. He set the broom aside and approached the fence, meeting the gaze of the crowd. Around him, familiar faces twisted with judgment. Neighbors he had known for years now stared with thinly veiled contempt. Some shook their heads, others whispered just loudly enough for Jonah to hear fragments of scornful gossip. The girl, Lily, whom he had saved the night before from the treacherous river currents, stood a few feet behind him, her eyes wide, anxious, and brimming with a mix of fear and gratitude. Jonah could see the tension in her small frame, the way she clutched her shawl to her chest as if it were a shield against the onslaught of disapproval. "She's just a girl," someone else shouted. "You went out in the dark, risked your life, and for what? To save someone who isn't even from this town?" A wave of murmurs followed, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disapproval. The words stung, each accusation striking Jonah like a physical blow. It wasn't the danger itself that worried him. He had faced wild rivers and storms before, but the venom of judgment, the way people could twist courage into folly for their own amusement or moral superiority. Jonah opened his mouth, intending to speak, but the words stuck. It was not fear that silenced him. It was the certainty that no explanation would satisfy them. These people had made up their minds before sunrise, and no amount of reason could pierce the veil of their prejudice. Instead, he took a slow, measured breath, allowing the morning air to fill his lungs. He looked past the crowd, at the wide expanse of his land, the river sparkling in the distance and the mountains looming as witnesses to everything. He reminded himself of the truth. He had done what was right. That was all that mattered. The tension thickened as a younger man, barely out of his teens, stepped forward. His face was flushed with anger, but his eyes were uncertain, betraying the conflict within him. "They say she's a virgin," he spat, as if that detail made Jonah's action more scandalous. "And you went and saved her? What kind of man does that without thinking about the consequences?" Jonah's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he remained silent, his gaze steady. He had no desire to argue, to defend his morality to those who clearly had none. Lily took a tentative step forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Please don't blame him," she said, looking at the crowd with wide, imploring eyes. "He saved my life. I would be dead if it weren't for him." Her words hung in the air, fragile and luminous like a single candle flickering in a storm. Some in the crowd scoffed, some muttered under their breath, and yet a few looked away, ashamed but silent. Jonah's heart ached for her, for the weight she bore simply by being alive. He thought of the night before, the thunderous roar of the river, the icy grip of the water, the frantic panic in her eyes. He remembered every desperate stroke he had made, every ounce of strength expended to drag her to safety. And now here she was, alive, shivering but safe. while the people around them called his bravery foolish, reckless, even immoral. Finally, Jonah spoke, his voice low, but carrying an unshakable calm. "I did what anyone should have done. That river didn't care about status nor about gossip. It only cared about the girl fighting for her life." His words were met with silence for a moment, a pause heavy with disbelief and irritation. Then, as if on cue, the whispers resumed, louder this time, weaving into a chorus of criticism that made his skin crawl. "Bravery? Ha! Foolishness," someone sneered. "You think saving a girl like that makes you noble? You've brought shame upon yourself in this town." The statements, venomous and unrelenting, fell on Jonah like stones, yet he refused to flinch. His mind wandered briefly to the river, the way the water had roared past him icy and merciless, and he felt a surge of quiet pride. The world may not understand honor, he thought, but honor is not given, it is lived. As the morning wore on, Jonah's solitude became a kind of sanctuary, a buffer against the escalating hostility. He tended to his cattle with precise, calm movements, ignoring the occasional jeer or pointed remark from the edges of the crowd. He knew that confronting them with anger would serve no purpose. The truth of his actions was already embedded in the world. The townsfolk's disapproval could not change that. Lily stayed close, her small hand brushing against his sleeve from time to time, a reminder of why he had endured the humiliation. By late morning, the crowd began to thin, some returning to their homes, muttering about foolish men and imprudent choices. Yet a few remained, lingering, as though they were determined to witness Jonah's supposed failure firsthand. He did not resent them. He felt only a quiet sorrow for the narrowness of their hearts, for the inability to recognize courage when it stood before them. Jonah walked to the edge of the riverbank, gazing at the water that had both threatened and tested him. He thought of Lily, standing behind him, alive and safe. And he realized that the judgments of the crowd, sharp and cruel as they were, held no power over the truth. In saving her, he had upheld something far greater than the fleeting approval of townsfolk. He had upheld his own integrity, and in doing so he had preserved the life of another. The day stretched on, the sun climbing higher and the air warming. Jonah remained at the river's edge for a long while, lost in thought, listening to the gentle murmur of the current and the rustle of leaves in the wind. He did not need applause or recognition. The knowledge that he had acted rightly, that he had faced danger and chosen compassion over cowardice was enough. And yet a faint flicker of curiosity stirred within him, a sense that perhaps, in ways he could not yet see, the world had noticed his deeds, and that justice in its own time might tip in his favor. When he finally turned back toward his cabin, he found Lily waiting, her eyes full of gratitude and quiet admiration. She did not speak at first, merely holding out her hand as if to bridge the gap between the chaos of the townsfolk and the quiet truth of what had occurred. Jonah took it, a simple gesture but one laden with understanding and mutual respect. In that moment, the humiliation of the morning seemed to lose its weight, replaced by a sense of calm resolve. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The gossip, the ridicule, and the skepticism of others would follow him, but he also knew that courage, true courage, was never about comfort or recognition. It was about doing what was right no matter the cost. And so Jonah returned to his cabin, the river sparkling behind him, Lily at his side, and the first true warmth of the morning sun on his face. The world had judged him, mocked him, and humiliated him, yet he felt no bitterness. Instead, a quiet certainty settled over him. The right action, no matter how scorned, always carries its own reward. And somewhere beyond the judgment and noise of the village, destiny was already stirring, ready to honor the man who had chosen honor above all else. Jonah rode slowly away from his cabin, the rhythm of the horse's hooves against the dirt path matching the steady beat of his thoughts. The early morning humiliation still clung to him, a shadow of whispers and accusations that had followed him from his own yard. Yet beneath it all there was an undeniable sense of clarity. He had done what was right. Every fiber of his being affirmed that. The girl he had saved, Lily, walked alongside him now, her delicate form a stark contrast to the rugged terrain and the roughness of Jonah's world. She had insisted on accompanying him, insisting that she owed him more than words could express. "I don't understand how they could treat you that way," Lily said quietly, her voice barely audible above the gentle rustle of leaves and the faint breeze brushing the plains. She avoided looking directly at him, instead keeping her gaze on the uneven path, After everything you did? They just... Her words trailed off, swallowed by the tension in the air. Jonah glanced at her, noting the anxious line of her jaw and the subtle trembling in her fingers. She was alive because of him, yet already she carried the weight of judgment that others had unfairly thrust upon him. He reached down and rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Lily, listen to me," he said gently. "Courage isn't measured by what people think. It's measured by what you do when no one is watching, when the choice is between life and fear." His voice, steady and calm, seemed to wrap around her like a protective cloak. They rode in silence for a while, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Jonah's mind replayed the rescue in vivid detail. The night sky black as ink, the deafening roar of the river as it surged past, dragging debris and frothing currents toward the rocks below. He had felt the cold bite of the water as he waded in, heart pounding, muscles straining against the pull of the current. And then suddenly, there had been her hand, small and desperate, reaching for his. The moment he grasped it, the world had narrowed to a single point. "Hold on, don't let go." That memory alone was enough to sustain him against the whispers and scorn he had endured that morning. Lily finally spoke again, her voice softer this time, tinged with awe. "I don't know how to thank you. I thought I was done for. When the water took me, I thought..." Her words caught in her throat and she lowered her gaze. Jonah waited patiently, allowing her to find the strength to continue. "You saved me," she whispered finally, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You saved my life, Jonah, and I..." She paused, her voice trembling. "I can never repay you." Jonah shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You don't have to. Just live, that's all I ask. That's more than enough." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of conviction. It was not about recognition or reward or even gratitude. It was about doing what was right, and ensuring that someone survived who would otherwise have been lost to the unforgiving river. The road ahead was uneven, winding through a forested stretch that had yet to feel the warmth of the morning sun. Birds darted between the trees, and the occasional rustle of a small animal startled them both. Jonah kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings. The world could be as dangerous on land as it was in the river, and he was not one to underestimate threats. Yet despite the natural perils, the real danger that morning had been human, the human capacity for judgment, for cruelty, and for misunderstanding. He reflected on how strange it was that saving a life could draw scorn, yet he did not allow it to sour him. As they rode, Jonah began to notice signs that they were approaching the northern pastures he often checked. The tall grasses swayed gently, and the occasional distant clanging of a cowbell punctuated the quiet. But his thoughts kept returning to Lily, to her safety, and to the courage it had taken both of them. The courage to face the river, to survive the night, and now, to endure the quiet sting of human disapproval. "Jonah," Lily said after a long silence, her voice hesitant, "do you ever regret helping me? Even for a moment?" Jonah chuckled softly, a low sound that blended with the wind through the trees. "Regret? No, I don't regret anything. Fear, maybe. Fear gripped me in the river, yes, when I thought I might not reach you in time. But regret?" He shook his head. "I'd rather risk my life than live knowing I could have helped and didn't. That's all there is to it." They rode in silence again, Jonah focusing on the path, Lily on the rhythm of her heart that still seemed erratic from the near-death experience. Gradually, the forest gave way to open land, and Jonah allowed his gaze to wander over the rolling hills, the golden fields, and the distant mountains that had always felt like guardians of the valley. There was a sense of peace here, a reminder that despite human judgment, the natural world carried no malice, only truth. The river had been ruthless yet impartial. Life had been tested, and the righteous choice had prevailed. As they approached a small clearing, Jonah slowed his horse. Lily fell back slightly, catching her breath, and he noticed a subtle shift in the air, a tension, a stirring that felt out of place. He squinted toward the horizon and caught sight of something unusual, a glint of metal, distant but unmistakable. Shields? Armor? He blinked, unsure, but his instincts told him to prepare. The morning's challenges had been dangerous, yes, but this hinted at something else entirely. Lily noticed his change in demeanor. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and fear. Jonah did not answer immediately, his eyes scanning the road ahead, noting the glinting figures that grew clearer as they rode closer. "Knights?" He murmured under his breath, more to himself than to her. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. What were 100 knights doing here so far from the kingdom, and why had they appeared now at this precise moment? The questions raced through his mind, but he did not panic. Jonah had faced far worse than uncertainty. He guided Lily toward a safe spot to pause, keeping his body slightly between her and the approaching figures. He watched as the sunlight danced off polished armor, highlighting banners that fluttered proudly in the morning breeze. There was a sense of authority, of order in their formation, and Jonah realized immediately that these were no ordinary travelers. They were organized, disciplined, and purposeful. As the knights drew nearer, the leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a commanding presence, rode forward, his gaze fixed on Jonah. There was no hesitation in the way he moved, no uncertainty in his expression. "Jonah," he called, his voice ringing across the clearing. "Your actions have reached us. What you did, your bravery, has not gone unnoticed." Jonah's eyes widened. He blinked, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. The villagers' mockery, the whispers, the humiliation, it had all been so immediate, so consuming. And now here were these knights acknowledging his courage as if the universe itself had decided to balance the scales. Lily's hand found his again, her grip firm and steady. "Jonah," she whispered, they know what you did?" Her voice trembled with awe. Jonah nodded slowly, the tension in his body easing slightly. He had acted without thought of reward or recognition. Yet it seemed that sometimes the world had a way of noticing even the quietest acts of bravery. The knights formed a corridor as they approached, their armor clinking softly, a metallic symphony of respect. Jonah guided his horse through the ranks, his heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and cautious pride. Lily followed closely, her eyes wide, taking in the sight of so many figures bowing and acknowledging his courage. For the first time that morning, Jonah allowed himself a small smile. The leader of the knights rode alongside him, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You risked your life for someone who could not repay you," he said. "Few men possess such courage. Few acts of true honor go unnoticed, and yours shall be remembered." Jonah swallowed hard, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The villagers' scorn seemed distant now, insignificant compared to this acknowledgement. Yet it was not praise he sought, he had never sought it. What mattered was the recognition that what he had done was right, just, and courageous. And now it seemed the world in its own way had agreed. As they rode together, Jonah felt a shift within him, a sense of balance restored. The morning had started with humiliation, with whispers and accusations that gnawed at his pride. But through every step of the journey, from the riverbank to the quiet forest, and now along the night-lined road, he had held fast to his principles and in doing so, had found something far greater than approval. He had found validation of his own heart. The sun climbed higher, bathing the road in light, and Jonah allowed himself a deep breath. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he was ready. The day had begun in disgrace, but it was ending in acknowledgement, proof that courage, integrity, and kindness were never truly invisible. And with Lily at his side, alive, safe, and grateful, he felt a sense of purpose that no mockery, no scorn, could ever diminish. Jonah guided his horse steadily through the corridor formed by the 100 knights, their armor glinting like a sea of polished steel in the midday sun. Each step of the horse sounded like a drumbeat on the dusty road, echoing the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He had faced countless dangers in his life: the river, storms that tore through the plains, wild animals with sharpened claws, but never had he faced something so overwhelming in its sheer presence: an entire formation of knights, disciplined, silent, and yet radiating a weight of authority that made the hair on his neck stand on end. Lily rode close behind him, her eyes wide with awe. She had never seen anything like this. The village had seemed so small, so insular, with petty concerns and idle gossip. And yet, here was a glimpse of a larger world, a world where courage was recognized, where honor was valued beyond the trivial judgments of neighbors. She could feel the tension coiling in Jonah's shoulders, even as he maintained a calm exterior, and she reached out to brush her hand against his sleeve, a subtle gesture of support. The leader of the knights, a tall man with a broad chest and a stern, noble face, rode alongside Jonah. His presence alone seemed to demand respect, not just from those around him, but from the very air itself. "Jonah," he said, his voice clear and unwavering, "your courage has reached the ears of the kingdom. Few men act with the selflessness you displayed. Few men risk their lives for others without thought of reward or glory. You have done so, and it has not gone unnoticed. Jonah nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of humility and disbelief. He had never considered that anyone beyond his small valley would even hear of his actions. And yet here was proof that deeds done from the heart could ripple far beyond the scope of their immediate moment. "I thank you," he said, his voice low but steady. "I did only what was right. I never sought recognition." The knight's expression softened slightly, though his voice retained its commanding tone. "And yet recognition finds those who act rightly, whether they seek it or not. The world owes you respect, and we are here to deliver it. The life you saved, the girl who stands behind you, will know that her survival was not a chance occurrence, but the result of courage, resolve, and honor." Jonah's eyes flicked toward Lily, who was pale but radiant, her dark hair catching the sunlight. He felt a warmth spread through him, a combination of relief, pride, and an unfamiliar but welcome sense of validation. She had survived, and now, unexpectedly, the world seemed to be acknowledging the courage it had taken to ensure her safety. The knights parted slightly, allowing Jonah and Lily to pass through a corridor of honor. Each knight raised a hand in salute or a sword to mark respect, their movements precise, almost ceremonial. The sound of clanging metal created a rhythm, a symphony of acknowledgement that resonated deep within Jonah's chest. It was not the kind of reward one could buy or earn through negotiation. It was the purest form of recognition, earned only through deeds of courage that had no expectation of return. As they continued, Jonah noticed the way the knight's formation extended farther than his eyes could see, stretching down the road in a line of unwavering discipline. Some of the younger knights had curious expressions, their eyes wide, trying to reconcile the simple rancher before them with the extraordinary act of bravery they had heard described in whispered tales. Older knights, those with graying hair visible beneath their helmets, nodded subtly, their faces betraying a quiet approval and understanding. They had seen acts of valor before, but they recognized when something genuine, rare, and pure had occurred. The leader spoke again, his voice carrying across the space between them. "Jonah, you may not see the full measure of what you have done, but understand this. Your actions have inspired those who witnessed them, and will continue to inspire others for years to come. Courage is contagious. Honor is eternal. You have ensured both." Jonah swallowed hard, the weight of the words pressing into his chest. It was not often that someone, let alone 100 trained knights, would articulate the significance of a simple act in such profound terms. And yet he knew it to be true. Courage, when genuine, transcends its immediate context. It leaves a mark, unseen perhaps in the moment, but indelible in the tapestry of human experience. The road ahead opened into a wider clearing, where sunlight poured generously, illuminating every detail of the knight's formation. Jonah felt a twinge of disbelief. This recognition, this parade of respect, seemed almost surreal. He thought back to the villagers' scorn, the whispers, the mockery, and the venom that had stung him only hours earlier. That judgment now seemed petty, inconsequential. He realized, with a quiet sense of satisfaction, that those who truly understood courage did not reside in the narrow confines of his village. Lily leaned closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jonah, they're honoring you." Her words trembled with awe, and her eyes sparkled with unshed tears. Jonah allowed himself a small smile, a rare display of emotion in a life accustomed to solitude. "Yes," he murmured. "It seems the world has its way of balancing things out." The leader of the knights gestured for Jonah to slow, and the horse obediently responded, easing into a trot. "We wish to accompany you for a short distance," he said, not as a requirement but as a gesture. "You have done more than you realize, and it is fitting that those who understand honor should walk, or ride, with you, if only for a moment." Jonah nodded, a lump forming in his throat. This was not a parade for vanity, nor a show of superficial praise. It was recognition of the values that had guided him long before the world noticed: courage, integrity, compassion. Each step of the horse, each clang of armor, seemed to affirm that the choices he had made, difficult as they had been, were in alignment with a truth far greater than himself. As they rode together, Jonah noticed the faces of the knights more closely. Some bore scars, evidence of battles fought long ago, and Jonah felt a kinship with them. These were men who understood sacrifice, who had faced danger and loss, and who recognized the quiet heroism of a man who acted selflessly in the face of imminent peril. It was humbling and yet empowering. The solitude that had defined Jonah's life suddenly felt shared, connected to a broader narrative of bravery and honor that transcended his small valley. A younger knight, barely more than a boy, rode up beside him, curiosity and reverence in his eyes. "Sir Jonah," he asked, his voice tentative, "did you not fear the river? Did you not think you might fail?" Jonah's gaze met the boy's, and he smiled faintly, a mixture of empathy and reassurance. "Of course I feared," he admitted. "Fear is natural. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting despite it. When a life depends on your actions, hesitation is a luxury you cannot afford." The boy nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson like a student of life rather than a knight in training. Lily's gaze remained fixed on Jonah, admiration deepening in her eyes. She had seen firsthand the fear, the determination, the strength that had allowed him to wrestle her from the river's grasp, and now, seeing him recognized by those who had dedicated their lives to valor, she felt a profound sense of relief and pride. She realized that the world was far larger than the small village that had judged him so harshly, and that true courage, once revealed, would always find acknowledgement. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the leader of the knights spoke once more, his voice carrying both authority and warmth. "Jonah, you have reminded us all that the measure of a man is not in wealth, position, or power, but in the choices he makes when faced with peril. You have chosen wisely, and in doing so, have become a symbol of what all men should aspire to be." Jonah felt a lump in his throat. Recognition was rare, and yet this acknowledgement did not feel like praise, it felt like justice, a quiet affirmation of the life he had lived and the choices he had made. He glanced at Lily, whose eyes shone with tears, and he realized that the impact of his actions extended beyond himself. He had preserved life, yes, but he had also inspired others, showing them the power of selflessness and courage. The knights gradually began to disperse, some returning to their stations, others continuing on patrol, but all of them had cast a lasting impression on Jonah's heart. As the sound of their hooves faded, he felt a sense. As they rode on, the plains stretching endlessly before them, Jonah allowed himself a deep, cleansing breath. The journey had begun with fear, uncertainty, and human scorn. It had led to recognition, respect, and an understanding that deeds of valor resonate far beyond the moment they occur. And for the first time in his life, Jonah felt the quiet joy of knowing that doing what is right is its own reward, but that sometimes the world, in its mysterious ways, notices too. The road stretched endlessly before Jonah, wide and bathed in the warm afternoon sunlight. The air was alive with the gentle hum of life, the distant clatter of cattle, the rustle of grasses swaying in the breeze, and the occasional trill of birds calling to one another. After the extraordinary recognition from the knights, a serene sense of calm had settled over him. But beneath that calm was a new awareness. The journey was far from over. There were lessons to carry, responsibilities to honor, and a life to live that would now forever be shadowed by the memory of the river, the rescue, and the acknowledgement that had come afterward. Lily rode close beside him, the small hand she placed on his arm a gentle anchor. Her eyes, still wide with awe, reflected a mixture of relief and a newfound respect. "Jonah," she said softly, "I never imagined the world could be like this. I thought courage would go unnoticed, or worse, punished, but you've shown me that it doesn't have to be that way." Jonah gave a faint smile, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the road dipped toward the valley below. "Courage is often unseen," he replied, his voice steady yet gentle. "The world doesn't always recognize it, and sometimes it mocks those who display it. But that doesn't diminish its value. Doing the right thing is never wrong, even if others don't understand at the moment." The memory of the river flashed in his mind, vivid and unrelenting, the icy water pulling at his legs, the frantic grasping for Lily's small hand, the roar of currents that seemed intent on swallowing her whole. He had been terrified, yes, but terror had fueled his resolve. Every second, every desperate motion, every strained breath had been worth it. And now, seeing her safe, her eyes full of gratitude, Jonah realized that fear had been a companion, not an enemy. Courage had been the choice he made in the presence of fear, not the absence of it. Lily glanced toward him, hesitation in her expression. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't been there?" Her voice trembled slightly, almost as if speaking the thought aloud could make it real. Jonah shook his head firmly, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. I try not to think about the what-ifs, they serve no purpose. The moment we dwell on them, we risk losing the present. All that matters is what we do now, what we choose to carry forward. For a while, they rode in contemplative silence, the rhythmic pounding of the horses' hooves blending with the ambient sounds of the valley. The earlier tension of the morning, the scorn from the villagers, and even the awe-inspiring recognition of the nights seemed to dissolve into a gentle clarity. Life, Jonah realized, was a series of choices strung together, some small and some monumental, each contributing to the person one becomes. Suddenly, Lily's voice broke the stillness, tinged with curiosity and awe. Do you think people will ever understand? Those who mocked you this morning? Her tone was quiet, yet there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. Jonah exhaled slowly, his gaze sweeping over the plains, the distant mountains, and the winding river that had nearly claimed her life. Some may understand, some may never. People are often limited by their own perspectives, but what matters is that we understand ourselves, that we act rightly. Recognition is a gift, not a guarantee, but knowing you've done what's right, that is enough. Lily's hand found his again, her fingers intertwining with his. She gave a small nod as if absorbing his words, letting them seep into her own understanding. There was a serenity in that connection, a silent acknowledgement that they had shared something far beyond the ordinary. The bond forged in fear, in risk, and in survival had become a quiet, enduring force, unspoken yet undeniable. As they continued along the winding road, the air began to shift subtly. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth from the mountains. Jonah noticed the subtle signs of movement ahead, a flash of color, the shimmer of metal. Though there were no horses, no knights this time. It was natural, the subtle pulse of life in the valley. Small creatures darted through the grasses, birds took flight in startled bursts, and the occasional hawk circled high above, observing with keen eyes. The world was alive, vibrant and vast, far beyond the confines of the village that had judged him so harshly. Jonah slowed the horse as they approached a bend in the road overlooking the valley. The view was breathtaking, the river winding like a silver ribbon through the patchwork of green and gold fields, the mountains standing like silent guardians, and the distant villages dotting the landscape like scattered jewels. Lily gasped softly, her hand tightening around his arm. It's beautiful, she whispered. I never realized how vast the world is. Jonah nodded, a soft smile on his lips. It is. And it's easy to forget that when we're caught up in small judgments, in gossip, in fear. But moments like this, moments of clarity, of perspective, they remind us what truly matters. For a time they remained there silent, letting the majesty of the valley fill them with quiet awe. Then Jonah spoke, his voice low but carrying weight. You survived, Lily, and that is a rare gift. Most people would not understand what it takes to survive what you faced. They cannot see the courage required in a single moment to act when everything seems lost. But surviving and living is the first step toward truly understanding the strength within ourselves. Lily turned to him, eyes shimmering. And you faced it for me. You didn't hesitate. Her voice wavered with emotion. I can never repay you. Jonah shook his head gently. You don't have to. The repayment is in your life, in your choices going forward. Live fully. Honor your own courage and remember this moment not as fear but as triumph. That is enough for both of us. As they began to descend into the valley, the road winding like a ribbon between the hills, Jonah sensed a shift in the air. It was subtle at first, a sense of expectancy, of anticipation, as if the world itself was acknowledging their passage. Birds flitted nervously above, the grasses swayed with a quiet intensity, and even the river seemed to glimmer more brightly, reflecting the sunlight like a mirror. There was a sense that something was approaching, though Jonah could not yet see it. Then in the distance, a group began to emerge, riding swiftly across the plains. At first it was impossible to discern who they were, but as they drew closer, Jonah realized they were not ordinary travelers. They moved with purpose, a coordinated rhythm that spoke of training and discipline. Their banners fluttered proudly, and their presence carried a weight of authority that made the heart beat faster, even at a distance. Lily's eyes widened in recognition. Knights, she breathed, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Again? They came for you? Jonah's heart swelled with a quiet pride, but also with humility. Recognition had come before, yes, but this time it felt different, more personal, more profound. The knights approached, forming lines along either side of the road, their swords raised in salute, their armor gleaming like polished sunlight. Jonah guided his horse forward slowly, the sense of awe and reverence growing with every step. The leader of the knights rode forward, his eyes locking with Jonah's. "Jonah," he called, his voice carrying across the plains. "Your courage has inspired more than just those who witnessed it. Stories of your bravery have reached the ears of many. The river, the girl, the risk you took. It has become a legend." Jonah swallowed hard, the enormity of the words settling over him. Recognition had always been fleeting, often meaningless. But this was different. This was validation in its purest form, a recognition that transcended village gossip, jealousy, and judgment. It was the acknowledgement of the truth that courage, when genuine, leaves a mark that time cannot erase. As the knights parted to create a corridor, Jonah felt a surge of emotion. He guided his horse through the line, each salute and raised sword a tangible symbol of honor. Lily rode beside him, her eyes glistening, and he felt the depth of connection between them. The bond forged in fear, in danger, in survival, now solidified through shared triumph and recognition. The leader spoke once more, his voice solemn yet warm. "Jonah, remember this. True courage is not performed for applause. True honor is not measured by recognition. But when deeds of righteousness are noticed, it is a reminder to all that integrity, bravery, and compassion endure." Jonah nodded, feeling the weight of the words, letting them settle into his heart. He glanced at Lily, whose expression reflected a mixture of pride, relief, and understanding. Together they rode onward, through the corridor of nights, through the valley, into a future that promised both challenge and the quiet assurance of righteousness acknowledged. As the last of the knights faded into the distance, Jonah exhaled deeply, feeling a profound sense of peace. The world had judged him, tested him, and ultimately recognized the truth of his courage, and with Lily at his side, alive, safe, and forever changed by his actions, Jonah knew that no mockery, no scorn, and no fear could ever diminish the strength of the choices. They slowed their horses near the riverbank, where the water flowed gently now, reflecting the fiery colors of the sunset. Jonah dismounted, stretching his stiff muscles after the long ride. Lily followed, moving cautiously, as if the river still held echoes of the perilous night that had brought them together. He knelt beside her, brushing dirt from her cloak, his fingers lingering for a moment to steady her. She looked at him with a quiet intensity, eyes shimmering with unspoken gratitude. "Jonah," she whispered, voice trembling slightly. "What will happen now? The villagers, the nights, the stories. Will they remember? Will they truly understand?" He shook his head, a gentle smile playing at his lips. "Some will understand, some won't. Some will cling to their narrow judgments, but true understanding is rare. What matters is that you live, that you grow, and that you carry the memory of this day in a way that honors what happened. The rest is up to time." She glanced at the river, the sunlight dancing on the water as if it were celebrating the moment. "It feels strange," she admitted, "to be here after everything, to feel safe almost, and yet alive." Jonah nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He thought about the villagers' mockery, their judgment that had weighed so heavily on him in the early hours of that morning. He remembered the shouts, the whispers, the sneers, and realized that those small human voices, though loud in their moment, had no power here. In the vastness of the valley, in the timelessness of the river and mountains, courage and virtue carried more weight than ridicule ever could. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves around them, and Jonah felt a strange stirring in his chest. It was a sense of culmination, as though the events of the past day, the river, the rescue, the humiliation, and the recognition by the knights, had led him to this exact moment. The world seemed to hold its breath around him, acknowledging the choices he had made, the bravery he had displayed, and the integrity he had preserved. They remained there for a long while, silent except for the murmur of the river and the soft whisper of the wind. Jonah thought about the lessons learned, about the delicate balance between fear and courage, between risk and responsibility. Every action, no matter how small, had a ripple effect. Saving Lily had changed more than just her life. It had set in motion a series of events that no one could have predicted, events that would echo far beyond the valley, far beyond the lives of the people who had mocked or admired him. As the sky deepened into shades of purple and gold, the distant sound of hooves drew his attention. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, moving steadily toward them. Jonah tensed for a moment, unsure whether they were friendly or hostile. But as they drew closer, he saw familiar banners glinting in the fading sunlight. It was the same group of knights who had honored him before, returning now with an air of solemnity and purpose. The leader rode up beside Jonah, dismounting with a fluid, practiced grace. "Jonah," he said, his voice calm but imbued with authority, "the tales of your bravery have reached even higher than before. The kingdom wishes to honor your courage formally, not only for saving a life, but for embodying the ideals of honor and virtue that inspire all who serve. You have set a standard that few can reach." Jonah felt a mix of humility and disbelief. Recognition had never been his goal, yet here it was, arriving not as a fleeting moment but as something substantial, lasting. I did only what was necessary," he said, struggling to find words that could convey the quiet pride he felt without sounding boastful. The knight smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Necessity is the measure of courage, Jonah, but it is also the measure of legacy. Today your deeds are not only remembered, they will be taught, shared, and honored for years to come." Lily's eyes filled with tears and she grasped Jonah's hand tightly. "You've done more than save me," she said softly. "You've shown the world what it means to be truly brave. You've changed everything, Jonah. Changed people. Changed lives." Jonah nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. Courage was no longer merely a personal act. It had become a force that shaped the perceptions, the values, and the hopes of others. Each life touched by his actions, each acknowledgement of virtue, contributed to a growing sense of justice and understanding. He realized that heroism was not about glory. It was about impact. It was about altering the course of lives, even in ways unseen, even in ways that time itself would measure slowly. The knights formed a circle around Jonah and Lily, lowering their swords in salute, their movements precise and ceremonial. Jonah felt the significance of the gesture, a tangible acknowledgement that bravery was recognized not only in momentary applause, but in enduring respect. It was a quiet, powerful validation, a reminder that actions, no matter how humble or courageous, had consequences that transcended personal expectation. As twilight descended, painting the sky with deep blues and soft stars, Jonah felt a profound sense of completeness. The trials of the day, the river, the scorn, the recognition, had all converged into a single truth. Living with honor and courage created ripples far beyond oneself. He looked at Lily, seeing in her eyes the reflection of a life saved, a hope rekindled, and a bond forged in the crucible of peril. "We should return," Jonah said finally, mounting his horse with deliberate care. "The valley is safe, the river calm, and the night will soon settle. But let us carry this moment forward, not as an end, but as a beginning." Lily nodded, climbing onto her horse with renewed determination. A beginning. Yes. A beginning of courage, of life, and of understanding. They rode through the valley, the stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky, the moon casting silver light over the landscape. Each step of their horses seemed to echo the rhythm of a larger story, a story of bravery, of choices, and of the enduring power of integrity. Jonah felt an unspoken promise in the night air, that his actions, though they began with fear and uncertainty, would resonate far beyond the present moment. As they reached the outskirts of the valley, a small village came into view, the faint glow of lamps welcoming them home. Jonah slowed his horse, allowing Lily to catch up. She smiled, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "Do you think they'll ever see the truth?" she asked quietly, nodding toward the distant village. Jonah's gaze softened. "Some may see it, some may not. But those who matter, those who understand courage, virtue, and honor, will remember. And you, Lily, you will carry this truth with you always." They dismounted near the river once more, letting their horses graze in the fading light. The night was serene, the world holding its breath as if acknowledging the culmination of events that had begun with fear and had ended in triumph. Jonah and Lily sat on the riverbank, side by side, letting the quiet of the valley envelop them. In that moment, Jonah reflected on the journey, the danger, the scorn, the acknowledgement by the knights, and the profound connection he had forged with Lily. He realized that true heroism was not defined by recognition or reward, but by the willingness to act rightly, to face fear, and to make choices that honor life itself. The river, once a symbol of danger and uncertainty, now represented survival, courage, and the enduring power of human integrity. Lily leaned against him, her voice a soft murmur. "Thank you, Jonah, for everything." He wrapped an arm around her, feeling the weight of the day lift fully from his shoulders. "No thanks is necessary," he replied. "What matters is that we live, that we carry forward what we've learned, and that we honor the courage within ourselves and others." The stars shone brightly overhead, the river glimmered in silver light, and the valley seemed to exhale in quiet approval. Jonah knew, deep within his heart, that this day, this series of moments would resonate far beyond the present. His courage had created ripples of change, not only in Lily's life, but in the hearts of all who witnessed, or would one day hear of, his actions. And as the night deepened, Jonah felt a profound certainty settle over him. True courage, once lived, could never be undone. It would endure, ripple outward, and inspire long after the echoes of human judgment faded into memory. In the quiet of the valley, beside the river that had tested him, Jonah finally understood what it meant to be a man of honor, and what it meant to leave a legacy of courage that would never be forgotten. The valley awoke to a crisp morning, sunlight spilling over the hills in golden streaks that warmed the dew-laden grasses. Jonah rose early, as was his habit, the events of the past days still vivid in his mind. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb Lily, who slept peacefully beside the cabin he had repaired with his own hands after the river's stormy fury had left it in partial ruin. The previous weeks had changed everything. The rescue, the scorn, the knight's honor, and the recognition from the kingdom had shifted the balance of his life in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. He stepped outside, taking in the valley. As it stretched beneath him, the morning mist curling along the riverbanks, the distant mountains sharp against the sky. Life had returned to its rhythm here, yet nothing felt ordinary. The river, once a symbol of peril, now reflected the serenity and resilience of the valley itself. Jonah felt a quiet smile form as he surveyed his land. The cabin, the river, the fields that would soon be planted with crops for the coming season. The valley had survived, and so had he, transformed by events that had tea.